So how have things been? I noticed I didn't get out to Tech TO this past week, but how was it?
Terrific event. The Tech TO folks have this this really terrific, network of folks who attend, and there's a great sort of overlap between kind of their audience and our audience, and so our founders and folks in the community really love attending some of those events. We have Natasha Barma among the speakers this week, and she recently left Upside Foundation to found a company. So really cool for the community, I think, to hear about her new company.
Yeah, and we've done a lot of work with Upside in the past, so it's I'll probably have to get her on to interview her myself.
Have you met Upside's new executive director, Juanita?
I don't, not off the top of my head, but it's a small community.
Yeah, you will eventually. She comes from Venture for Canada. She actually was super involved in our program design here for OneEleven. So we're excited to work with her.
Fabulous. All right. I think I let everybody know we're here and we're live. So we might as well get going. Backup recorder. I might, as I'm getting my sponsorship packages up, I might hit you guys up for a podcast sponsorship where we're using your podcast studio and that kind of stuff, just so you know.
Okay, let me know. Do you record from home?
Right now, yeah, I record from home. I'm in my basement office, and this works out pretty well, but it's not quite the same feel as I used to record live. Yeah. I've got some equipment here, but if there's a proper place to do it, it becomes much better.
Gotcha. Well, let us know. How often do you record, Craig? Is it weekly?
Well, the podcast goes out weekly. We're just starting up again after the Christmas break. But I record when I can. Like I'm recording twice this week, and I think I got 2 next week. So I have a few in the can. So I'd schedule them ahead of time. If I had a studio, I'd probably schedule 3 or 4 in a block and just come in and do them.
Gotcha.
All right, you ready?
Ready.
Welcome back to Startup Talk. I'm your host, the Startup Coach, founder of Toronto Starts, one of the largest startup communities in Canada. And with me today is Matthew Lombardi, Managing Director of OneEleven. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you, Craig, for having me. Excited to be here and excited to talk to the community.
Well, let's kick it off with, tell us a little bit about the history and the mission of OneEleven.
Sure. So OneEleven was founded way back in 2013. It was founded by John Ruffalo when he was the original leader of OMERS Ventures, first pension fund in Canada to have a venture arm. The Ontario Centre of Excellence at the time, now renamed the Ontario Centre of Innovation, and Ryerson University, now renamed Toronto Metropolitan University. So lots of change since those original 3 founders for them and for the ecosystem, obviously. And I think probably worth remembering, some of the philosophy behind the founding of OneEleven. So it was the brainchild of those 3 entities, and at the time, much in the same way that it was atypical at the time for a pension fund to have a venture arm. Now they all have them. That group of organizations knew that it was atypical for there to be supports in the ecosystem for scaling companies, right? So the DMZ already existed at the time. There were lots of great pieces of infrastructure to support startups, right? Companies that were at the idea stage, but there weren't many pieces of infrastructure, if any, to support companies that had gotten past a seed round, that had that had already acquired some customers, that had some traction in the market. And that's really the sort of missing middle, right? Where the majority of companies will fail in statistically in the startup journey is when they get to that scaling stage. So OneEleven was the brainchild of those organizations that knew that was the missing middle for startup support. And it's grown ever since then. It's called OneEleven because it started out at 111 Richmond Street, which is, I believe, now home to Google. I haven't actually seen the original office, but it was only 5,000 square feet to start out. We're now in 55,000 square feet at our current location, which is 325 Front, right at the corner of Front and Blue Jay.
Can you tell us a little bit about your facilities? Most of our listeners probably have never been to OneEleven.
Yeah, well, look, if you haven't been, I'd encourage you to check out our website, OneEleven.com. We are constantly hosting events, whether it's a Tech TO joint event, Fuck Up Nights with Marsha Drucker, something with the Upside Foundation, hopefully something with Toronto Starts, hint, hint, Craig. But we're constantly hosting activities and activations where folks in the startup community or folks who are looking to get into the startup community and learn more about opportunities can interact and network with one another and learn about some of the interesting companies that are hiring, lots of them. So our facility is 55,000 square feet. We're down at the corner of Front and Blue Jay. We've got a whole floor. It's the fourth floor of the building. When you approach the building, it's this wacky looking structure. It kind of looks like it's out of Star Trek. It's this sort of trapezoidal shaped building from the outside. And it looks so odd because I'm told that it was originally a data center for a large bank. And so it was perhaps never intended to house office space, but it was redone in 2017 to house OneEleven. So it's inside an incredibly modern state-of-the-art facility. We've got a mix of open concept space, private offices. We've got a podcast studio, a wellness room. We've got 3 different kitchens located on the floor, a large event space, some classrooms for our programming. The space is really optimized with anything companies need for turnkey access and infrastructure.
Now, we were talking a little bit about your programming before we started, but how does OneEleven support professional development of its members through your upskilling programs?
Yeah, so the programming is our second offering. It's the twin pillars of co-locating and that turnkey infrastructure and our program. And I think our program is incredibly unique. But maybe I'll just sort of rewind a little bit and talk to you a little bit about how we developed our programming. So when I started at OneEleven, it was 2020, sort of the depths of the pandemic. It was summer 2020. And needless to say, we couldn't really use the space. It was still pre-vaccine. No one was coming into any office space. And that was a big forcing function for us as an organization to sort of step back and say, if we can't use our space to activate all these terrific events and programs in person, which had historically been how OneEleven had achieved, putting people together in a community, what could we actually do to add value to a scaling tech company, right? How would we actually help? And so it kicked off a process of basically going around and talking to all of the different alumni, different VCs in the ecosystem. And we basically just asked them, in a world in which, let's say hypothetically, there's never a vaccine and no one ever goes back to an office, how would OneEleven add value absent use of space? We got some interesting answers, and eventually we put together an archetype of what is a OneEleven company, right? And a OneEleven company typically is a company that had just raised between, call it 3 and 5 million as a median or a mean, had between 6 and 12 employees, and was getting to that stage where they're scaling so quickly and hiring so quickly that they would quickly, within 18 months of joining OneEleven, suddenly balloon to 20 or 30 or 40 employees. And so we drilled down a little deeper on that question. And what we kept hearing over and over again, Craig, from founders would say to us, or they'd say to me, Matt, at the stage at which my company joined OneEleven, everything was great. I had a 26-year-old on my team who was my first product person or my first customer success person. And they were really great as an individual contributor on a 9-person team, let's say. But as soon as we suddenly grew to 30 employees, it all sort of falls down because managing personnel is a totally different skill set. And founders would then go on to tell me how, as a founder, founders can get almost anything they need in the ecosystem if they just stick their hand up and ask, right? People are willing to talk to founders. We have an incredibly collegial ecosystem. People are willing to help. People want to help. But the people just below the founders, that type of support wasn't available to them, right? Or at least not in the same capacity. And so we very purposely chose in the depths of the pandemic to say, okay, this is an underserved niche in the ecosystem. Sort of going back to OneEleven's roots, right? OneEleven itself was founded to fill an underserved niche in the ecosystem at a higher level for companies at that stage of scale. So we said, okay, we're going to continue to focus on companies at this stage of scale post-seed, but we're going to drill down and we're going to focus our programming on a niche that's underserved within those companies, which is the people right below the founder, who are in many cases first-time personnel managers, managing people for the first time as you go from individual contributor to people manager. That is just as important to a company's success at that stage of growth as the founder getting their supports elsewhere in the ecosystem. So we built out an entire programming strategy. We went and we got Venture for Canada to come on board, Scott Sturrett and Juanita Lee Garcia, who now leads the Upside Foundation. They came in and they designed a program curriculum for us. And the model is really simple. It's, we're not necessarily building out anything net new in terms of program delivery, but what we've done is we've said, okay, there are really amazing organizations all throughout our ecosystem. You think of organizations like Juno College or BrainStation. There are so many that deliver great modules. So what we've done is we've gone out and we've curated from the ecosystem players and the delivery partners who do good things and the three verticals we chose are customer success, marketing, and product. So we've gone out and we've procured and curated the modules that our member company practitioners in those three areas need. And we basically deliver those at scale, right? So because we intake exclusively companies who are post-seed, we're able to surface common problem sets amongst their practitioners in those three areas. And then we're able to deliver programming on a quarterly or biannual basis for those people, again, just below the founder, most cases, they're first-time personnel managers in those three areas, customer success, product, and marketing, by procuring and then delivering programming throughout the ecosystem and assembling it into a curriculumized fashion that makes sense that we can deliver over and over again. So we've really found a cool niche with our programming in terms of upskilling those emerging people leaders at our member companies. Those are people who, in many cases, they'll go on to be founders in their own right. They're people who want to transfer that knowledge. They're people who also want to understand what's going on at other member companies within the community with practitioners, who are facing common problem sets at the same stage of growth. So it's worked out really well. And we know it works for a couple of reasons. Number one, the founders around here tell us that it helps them with employee retention. They're super excited about the fact that OneEleven has taken that upskilling challenge off their plate as a founder, right? You're taking things out of the founder's calendar rather than, I think the typical model is trying to get into a founder's calendar. So saving founders time. Number two, I'd say the majority, probably just over 50% now, of applications to OneEleven are now people coming to us. And it's not because they want office space first. It's because they heard about this module or that training program or this other lunch and learn that we've delivered. And they're saying, I really want that for my customer success team. So that's really exciting. And it's a great validation of the programming that we put together. Like I said, at first entirely remotely because it was the sort of middle of COVID. Now, as we've reached sort of full vaccination as a society and people have come back to the office, now is the fun part. So now we've gotten to smash together our old offering, which is use of the space, with our new offering. And so now we're able to deliver that not just online, but also hybrid in person. So we now have 42 companies who share the space, all of whom are venture backed, who've collectively raised over $800 million in funding. So it's a really exciting and healthy and happy and vibrant community. You can see that I'm in a smaller room. We have 55 meeting rooms. I think 53 of them are being used right now. I ought to have booked in advance if I wanted the nicer room with the OneEleven branding behind it for the podcast, Craig. But sometimes even I forget how full we are these days.
That's amazing, especially, on the other side of COVID, where not everybody is sure about their work from home or work back at the office policy, that you guys are doing so well.
Yeah, I mean, at one point during COVID, our landlord, Oxford Properties, actually told us that we were the most utilized office space in all of the downtown, at least in their portfolio. And I think they're, they own quite a few commercial properties for office space down here. I think part of the trick is we're such a flexible hybrid offering, right? So we're able to do things that help companies one, experiment with their footprint needs, right? Like I think the old days of this is your head count and therefore here's the metric and this is how many square footage you need. Those days are over, right? Every company has chosen to collaborate in a hybrid way, however works best for them. So we have companies that, maybe have 12 total staff and they love to be in every day, all day. And that's how they choose to collaborate. We have other companies that have 60 staff. Maybe they're distributed across the country. Maybe only half of them are in Toronto. Of those who are in Toronto, maybe, half of those never want to see an office again. And amongst the other half, they want to come in 1 to 3 days a week each. And so we're flexible enough that we can accommodate those working styles for our member companies, I think is number one. And number two, again, because we're curating companies who are exclusively at the same stage of growth, that allows us to, number one, drive out programming that's relevant for everybody and helps address common problem sets. But two, it allows us to say, okay, on Thursdays, it's customer success day. And so you're not only going to build culture vertically within your own company, but horizontally across practitioners from other member companies, because Thursdays there'll be a lunch for customer success practitioners and a lunch speaker for them.
That sounds amazing. Can you share some success stories of companies that have grown and scaled with the help of OneEleven?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of companies, off the top of my head, just within the last 3 months, we've had 3 member companies raise really significant financing rounds, Pluto, Cinchi, and Composer, all of whom have raised, don't quote me on the number because I don't have them in front of me, but all of whom have raised over 5 million Canadian financing rounds. And that's just in the last 3 months. I think Pluto's round was 20 million, in fact. But again, don't quote me on the numbers because some of them announced in USD and some Canadian. So I've got to get the list consistent in front of me. But we do our best to help connect our member companies in ways that aren't just the big flashy goals, right? So I think everybody knows that a fundraise is a milestone and it's a great one. But we see success as also just how are you building your business day to day, right? Because for founders, it's a tough slog, and those milestones are great, but those are just the tip of the iceberg for all the hard work that you do going into them. And so for us, it's every time we've connected someone to a new customer, every time we've connected 2 member companies who do business together. I'll give you one great example. I've got a member company here called Real Sage. They just rebranded. They used to be called Soul Rooms, and we put Soul Rooms together with an alumni company of ours called Van Hack, which is run by Ilya Brodsky. And Van Hack's doing amazing work, resettling refugees, making sure that they're connected into Canada and into technology jobs, which is amazing. So shout out to Van Hack. But we connected Van Hack with Soul Rooms, now Real Sage, and they put together an initiative where they could then find housing for those refugees once they got here. Because Soul Rooms is in the Real Sage rather now is in the property tech space. And that was helpful to them, not just from a social good perspective, but also helpful to those 2 companies for future doing business together. So, it's all sorts of little things like that that really can only happen in an environment where, again, you're curating companies who are around the same stage of growth, but also you're putting them in an environment where they're excited about collaborating with the person right next to you, or the person 20 feet from you, or the person you run into at the coffee machine. And then they're starting to tap into the community and have those, conversations that can really only happen in a non-scheduled meeting, right? You're going to bump into someone, you're going to have lunch with another founder, you're going to have lunch with another practitioner. And it's those small wins day to day that I think are frankly way more important than the milestones, because those little wins build into those big funding milestones that people announce.
It's funny that you mentioned it. I was just talking to another founder this week, and we were talking about all these events that happen. The value that most people get out of it is the networking piece and meeting and talking with the other practitioners in similar like when I host a workshop, people will come, we'll have 8 to 10 or 12 people in the room learning whatever, but the biggest value they get is the connections they make and the coffee breaks they have and the,
Yep.
trying to get them back, because now all of a sudden they've got friends for life. That it's so valuable. It's amazing that those things happen. Can you tell us more about the role of peer groups and entrepreneurs in residence, mentors, advisors at OneEleven?
So we've got a number of really great people who have been members of the community in the past, who are willing to stick their hands up and volunteer to help out future founders and current practitioners. So I think of somebody like Mark Combs. Mark Combs used to work for Blue Jay Legal, one of our member companies. Mark's now gone on to found his own company called Sleep Out. They just appeared on Dragon's Den. I think they're about to appear on Good Morning America. And Mark spends time in the space volunteering, doing office hours on product for some of our current member companies. He's also helped us kind of conceive of and think through our product peer group, right? Which is a way that we facilitate all of the product people to regularly meet with and talk to each other, whether that's a discussion over pizza or a more formalized lunch and learn with a product expert like Mark or someone else that we choose to bring in. It's just a way to make sure that, again, we're facilitating people getting together with peers in the same job function, again, at companies from the same stage of growth, and then facilitating discussions around what challenges they're actually facing, right? Because there are no new problems. And when there are new problems, it's in things like quantum computing. But in general, in business, there are no new problems. You just got to go and find the right answer. And generally, someone who's attacked it before has it. I think of somebody like Roy Pereira. Roy Pereira, I call him a repeat offender because he's been at OneEleven with 3 different companies. Most recently, he sold his company Calendar Hero, which I believe was called Zoom AI before that. He sold it to Vendasta, and another Canadian company who remembers here until very recently. Roy hangs out and he volunteers with, different peer groups, but also he volunteers as a mentor with our Hand Up Mentor program, doing one-on-one coaching for some of the younger entrepreneurs who are maybe at their first startup for the very first time. So it's stuff like that where we're able to tap into an incredible alumni network, whether it's just, a guest speaker for a lunch and learn, the Hand Up Mentorship program one-on-one, the peer groups, which are, again, larger groups of folks in the same job function. All of those things, again, you can only really facilitate when you've sort of built up the virtuous flywheel of a community where people want to give back.
Yeah, you've mentioned a few people like Roy. Roy is an amazing person. He comes and mentors for us once in a while. I don't think he has since COVID, but I haven't asked him. But and Ilya out of Van Hack, he's doing great work. So definitely love those people. You mentioned a few things around how you're taking things away from founders and helping them scale from a programming point of view. But is there other ways OneEleven helps companies navigate challenges of scaling?
Look, I think the most important thing is that we stay focused on doing one thing really well. I think there's a tendency in the sort of incubator accelerator universe where it's easy to say, oh, and we should do X, and we should do Y, and we should do Z. And what you end up is in a situation where you're doing 10 different things to help and you're mediocre at all 10. We're trying to be really good at only 2 things, right? And those 2 things are, 1, providing a really turnkey piece of infrastructure so that the member companies here don't have to think about, the internet, the coffee, a quiet meeting room, a phone booth for their great infrastructure is 1. And number 2 is upskilling for those emerging people leaders and making sure that programming is constantly being fine-tuned and refined. And again, the mentorship program and some of the other pieces we've already discussed are adjacent parts of that. And all of those activations and the infrastructure, fall under the umbrella of creating a great community. We'll augment that with things like, our Chinese Lunar New Year lunch on Monday, our Diwali community lunch that we did back in October. We're hosting a charity poker night for Sick Kids Hospital on the 23rd. We'll do those social aspects of it as well. It's not just all work and programming, but it's just about building a community and, again, staying focused on the things that we're really good at. I always hesitate when folks say, you could also do this. Sure, we could also do a million other things, but we're a not-for-profit, and we know that in order to be the best at helping with the upskilling challenge, we need to focus all of our resources there.
There's so many other things we could be doing in this world, and yeah, you have to focus, otherwise you get distracted by everything.
Yeah,
go ahead, sorry.
No, it's one of the things that I'm constantly sort of reminding our team is, saying no to something means you're preserving capacity to be the best at the thing we're already doing.
Absolutely. Now, I'm aware of OneEleven, been around for a while, like Toronto started back in 2015, but a lot of people aren't. Can you speak to the impact that OneEleven has had on the Toronto startup community?
Sure. I mean, I start with our alumni, right? When you think about companies like Wealthsimple, Borrowell, Maple, Coho, Clio, Jobber, like some of the biggest unicorns in Canada, have come through here. And, we're really proud of that legacy. And, we're really good at A, tapping into those alumni networks, but B, when folks get into OneEleven, and it is still, it's still tough to do that, right? You have an expectation, and rightfully so, of the type of support that you're going to get and the type of curated network that you suddenly become a part of and have access to. We get 10 to 12 applications a month, and our acceptance rate is only about 20%. And we want to make sure that, anytime we onboard a company, that one, we can provide value to them so they're at the right stage of growth to actually avail themselves of our programming. And two, that they're going to provide value to the rest of the community, right? They're going to be participatory. They're going to want to make sure that their staff participate. They're going to come to some of the socials, right? Sometimes we get folks who come and say, I just need the cheapest 3 desks possible. And I say, well, you know what? WeWork's right across the street.
Yeah, and that's a good answer to have, because there's lots of places where you can rent a desk, but that's not necessarily what you're doing.
Absolutely. That's not what we're curating for.
So we talk in the startup world about burnout and how working 24 hours a day is a badge of honor. But let's face it, work-life balance is becoming more and more, a realistic topic, because we can't be working 20 hours a week. How does OneEleven support work-life balance of its startup members?
Yeah, so you won't be surprised that my answer comes from a very biased place, and I want to tell you, I'm extremely pro coming to the office, for obvious reasons, but also because look, I'm the kind of person who, if I'm home all day and I'm only taking meetings on Zoom and I haven't spoken to a real human live and in person, it really drains me of my energy. I'm energized by being around people. And so my bias is to that. And, as a result, I very much bring the lens of, there are types of interactions that when they stack up, they have the propensity to burn you out faster. And to me, that is too many Zoom calls, and too many days without human contact in person, and too much of just being on a screen. Trading too many emails when a 6-second conversation would do. Having 900 Slack notifications stress you out when grabbing lunch with someone or a coffee would have done the trick. So I really believe that the remote work world, look, there are positives to it. I'm thrilled that the sort of the bad old days of presenteeism and you need to be in 5 days a week, and that, inflexibility for working parents. I'm glad those days are over, right? COVID has expedited the end of that by showing us that remote work is possible, but that doesn't mean we should overutilize remote work, right? We should use it when we need it, when we need that accommodation. But, the death of the office has been greatly over exaggerated, because remote work has led to people burning out quicker, right? You're not getting those in-person interactions. You're not being energized by having in-person conversations. You lose a lot of context when you don't get the body language and the fullness of the conversation, because you'll never get that on video. And the other thing that I really try to stress to young people And Venture for Canada is really good at this. They had me come speak at a conference that they held for young people looking to break in tech. One of the questions that one of the folks asked on this panel was, what's one piece of advice that you have for someone who's just graduating and going into their first job that you think is contrary to popular opinion right now, or something that no one else is going to tell us? And my piece of advice was, and I'll tell you, Craig, some of the folks reacted almost violently to this piece of advice, but I stand by it, is do not take a remote first job as your first job when you're a young person, because you will miss out on so much mentorship and networking. When I think of all the best mentors in my career, when I think about tapping into people like a Roy Pereira, that is just never going to happen on Zoom. It's just never going to happen. You need those in-person reps. You need those conversations, those coffees. When I think about my 20s and the mentors that I built and the people who, looked out for me in my career, that was just not possible if it wasn't in person. And I don't think that can be replicated in the world of remote first work. And, if I were to summarize that advice in one sentence, it would be showing up is half the battle. It still is half the battle.
I would agree with that, except it's probably more than half the battle. I think it's not showing up as 90% of it. Because everything else is downhill from there. Like, it's easier. Yep. It's just getting there is the problem. And I have this conversation with lots of people, and some people celebrate work from home and say, the death to the office, and other people are on the other side of the fence. And I just sit back and say, how long till people realize that there's value in being in the room, and not being in the room means you're missing what happens when they mute. You're missing the body language. You're missing the breaks in between, the befores and the afters, so much other stuff. And so how long till you are at a disadvantage for being at home and that you need to be back? And I would agree with you. Those times where I've had mentors or where I've mentored other people, the most of the valued relationships came naturally. Those just conversations over coffee that start to develop versus, hey, I want to book a half hour of your time. It just starts happening naturally, and you build these relationships and those mentorships happen. So being physically together makes a huge difference.
Yeah. And I mean, look, when I think about even the social aspects, right? Like when I think about, the Toronto Star's pitch nights, I mean, there's a magic to you being there and saying, it's 20 seconds, folks. It's 20 seconds, right? There's a magic to that again, it's not the same if you got to mute somebody on Zoom at 21 seconds. You just miss out on all of that. And, I celebrate work from home as well. I think it's an amazing tool that we have pulled forward from the future due to COVID, right? It was a silver lining of COVID that we discovered that was a lot more feasible than perhaps society writ large thought in 2019, but in moderation.
Yeah, I live in Burlington. So, before everyone wanted to have coffee meeting, and I don't want to, hop on a train to Toronto and, get somewhere and then go back. It's 3 hours to have a 15-minute coffee with you. Now, don't get me wrong. I love stacking up meetings. I need to have face-to-face stuff, but there's a good balance, I think, where we can have those coffee meetings quickly over Zoom, although they're not the same. It's absolutely not the same. We've talked about, the 3 to 5 million raise, 6 to 12 employees that OneEleven kind of range that OneEleven looks at. Are there key industries that OneEleven focuses on?
No, and very purposely, no. I think as an accelerator or an incubator, you get to choose, do we want to focus vertically, quite literally by industry, or do we want to focus horizontally by stage of growth? And so we've purposely chosen the latter. And so we're agnostic on industry. We've got companies in here that run the gamut from education tech to health tech, a few decarbonization startups, enterprise SaaS, you name it. It's in there amongst our 42 members. And that's historically been the case for OneEleven. Now, I'd say it tends to organically skew fintech and enterprise SaaS, but that's sort of reflective of the Toronto startup ecosystem.
Can you tell us about your role as managing director of OneEleven?
Yeah, I certainly can. I mean, I mean, the first thing I would say is, so I've been here now since mid 2020, and when I started here, so we talked a little bit about the reboot of the programming earlier, but I'll go back even earlier for you, Craig. So I was hired in August of 2020 to reboot OneEleven. So it had officially shut down in the first month of COVID in April of 2020. It officially shut down, and it was one of the earliest victims of the pandemic. And I think, that largely sort of wasn't seen or heard by too many people outside of the immediate community, because if you remember those early days of COVID, there was a story about 10 different things shutting their doors almost hourly, let alone daily. And so OneEleven was one of the early victims of the pandemic. And I was actually brought on that summer, a few months after it closed, because there was sort of a movement afoot amongst various companies and alumni to say, hey, hang on a second, we want this back, and we think it can work, and we'd like someone to take a good long look at rebooting OneEleven. And so this is where the Ontario Centre of Innovation came in. So the Ontario Centre of Innovation is a not-for-profit focused on commercialization of research and technology in Canada, in Ontario rather, and they are located one floor below us in the same building. And so they were really familiar with the OneEleven community, and they were a founding partner of it back in 2013. And so they took a look at it, decided that they wanted to help reboot the thing. And so I was brought on board to do that. So on my first day here as managing director, I was a managing director of precisely nothing, 55,000 empty square feet. I was hire number one. We had no member companies. I was handed three things, Craig: a call sheet for all the companies that had lost their place here when it went under earlier in the year. So literally names and phone numbers and a couple of emails. A set of keys to the floor. And this might be the funniest one. I was handed a 80-page lease obligation for an empty floor. And that's it. Lease obligation, a call sheet, and some keys. So I walked in here, and honestly, Craig, it looked like you ever seen. There are a couple scenes in the show The Walking Dead where they walk into a room that had very obviously been quickly vacated at the apocalypse, and there are empty coffee cups and half full Coke cans and half eaten meals. And so I sort of walked in here, and that's kind of what it was like, because, if you remember those early days of COVID, I mean, things were, NBA games were disrupted mid-game, right? And everybody was sent home from the stadium. I mean, and that happened in a lot of places to a lot of people in a lot of office spaces as well. And, this place was no exception. So, it was an interesting process kind of becoming managing director, because, we were really starting the thing over again. Now, the good news is we had a lot of great people, like, the folks at OCI, John Ruffalo, our entire advisory board, a lot of great alumni who wanted to return. Like, it really does, they say it takes a village to raise a child. Well, let me tell you, it takes more than a village to resurrect one. So there were a lot of good people who were really invested in helping to stand this thing back up. And so, part of it started out with, just calling around to that call list and understanding, how would folks experience OneEleven? How would it help them in their journey as founders? And again, asking the question that led to us building out our upskilling program, which is, if for the next little while we can't use the space, how could we actually add value to scaling companies as a community? And how can we keep that sort of community spirit alive, right? So one of the most helpful pieces of infrastructure that I was able to surface and take over was there was an existing Slack channel with about 1,200 people on it who were all OneEleven alumni. And that group of people was just, crowdsourcing from that was amazingly helpful in terms of understanding, how can we get this community back to a place where people are being enabled to help one another again, and when they're ready to come back in person. And that happened in fits and starts. As you probably remember, Toronto was in and out of lockdown for a good almost 2 years, right? Like it's worth remembering right now that 1 year ago today we were locked down, right? So we've only been out of it for 12 consecutive months now.
Yeah, and it doesn't quite feel like that.
Right, right. Everything sort of happened in dog years through COVID.
Absolutely. I remember my I'm losing it for a second there. CEO meeting with the CEO of CEO a while ago, years ago, and talking about the disparity in funding for founders. At the time, I think women founders received less than 7% of startup funding. Can't remember
Yeah.
the exact number. And we see these numbers, and I don't know if it's getting any better. But what is OneEleven doing about how do you support diversity and inclusion in the technology and the startup ecosystem?
Yeah. So is it getting any better? Look, the latest data that I've seen is from a Conference Board of Canada report by Susan Black and her team. I believe it was spring of last year, so spring of 2022, that the report came out, and the numbers are still terrible. Women founders are still disproportionately not receiving funding. So what are we doing to attack that? So there's a number of initiatives that we do in the diversity and inclusion space. One, we're partnering with Gradient Spaces to provide in-kind support for their LGBTQ accelerator, and that's for founders from that community. Number two, we're doing a lot of work with the Canadian Women's Network, which is an amazing organization run by Joanne Fedeko, whether that's joint communications, joint events, trying to make sure that we're recruiting more female founders upstream in our pipeline. And then number three, we're trying to do a brand new initiative that we're currently putting together. And this is with Colin Lynch, who's on my advisory board here at OneEleven. And Colin is the founder of the Black Opportunity Fund. And we're working with Colin and his team to try to assemble something specifically around funding for Black entrepreneurs who are founding companies. And that's something that we're hoping to roll out in the next couple of months. But the Black Opportunity Fund, if you haven't seen it, they've just finished, I believe, their fundraise, and then they're about to start moving into program delivery. So we're hoping to be one of the first programs that gets to actually work with them as they start to profile some of the funding they've raised for Black entrepreneurs across Canada.
What are some of the key partnerships and collaboration that OneEleven has formed?
Oh my goodness. There are so many. I've got a list, and I got to make sure I get everybody named so no one's upset. But TechTO is a big one. You and I chatted just before we started the pod. We had a big TechTO event on Monday, and we try to do those almost monthly. TechTO is such a great audience of people in the tech ecosystem, similar to ours. If you were to, I think, draw a Venn diagram of the type of people who attend TechTO events, they're the types of folks who are really interested in sharing, giving back to the community. We host Fuck Up Nights events. Marsha Drucker and her team do an amazing job animating stories of failure, which is so important for companies to understand. CNW, as mentioned, we get to tap into the OCI network, and which is a pan-provincial network of earlier stage startups who get funded via their market readiness fund. There are so many good organizations in Toronto that love hosting things here. We've hosted the Peaks Bet on Canada Summit last November, which is awesome. We're hosting a big podcasting conference that Fatima Zaidi from Quilt is putting on in March. The Accelerator Center out of Kitchener-Waterloo wants to start hosting a few things in Toronto, so they'll be hosting through OneEleven. So I'd say you come here almost any night of the week, and somebody's hosting some sort of social or programmatic educational event geared towards startups and founders. It's the kind of thing where, first of all, I'm forgetting a few organizations who will be upset, but it's the kind of thing where you can almost set your clock to it, right? Like there's 6 p.m. start time, and suddenly the speakers in the kitchen will be booming with some sort of educational event or some sort of networking event. So I really encourage people to check out our website, check out our social media feeds if you're interested in just understanding how the startup ecosystem in Toronto ticks.
Yeah, and we're planning on hosting a couple events with you in 2023. We're just finalizing our schedule. Awesome. We got a couple interesting pitch competitions coming up, and we think it'd be great to partner with you on that. Can you tell us the role of OneEleven has in promoting the Toronto startup ecosystem to the world?
Yeah. Look, I was fortunate enough to get to travel as part of the Canadian delegation to Web Summit, which is the sister conference, or maybe the antecedent conference, because it was first to Collision, which Toronto does host, and we'll host again in June. And so I got to go with, you know, Toronto Board of Trade, Toronto Global, all of those ecosystem players to Portugal, to Lisbon in Portugal in November of last year. And, you know, I got to speak on a panel about talent and, you know, how Toronto attracts global talent to found startups here. You know, at OneEleven, I think about a quarter of the founders here are here on the Canada Startup Visa. So Toronto is obviously a magnet for foreign tech talent, but you know, it's important that we tell that story abroad, and we tell it often. So I got to speak on a panel that included Ilya from Van Hack, and we just talked about what a great city Toronto is. And we had, you know, an incredible audience of folks from all over the world who were, you know, who had showed up to Toronto Global's booth to hear about that and other topics from different folks in the Canadian delegation. Because people, you know, Canada's an incredibly desirable place to immigrate, as we know, and you know, increasingly our tech companies are making a name for themselves globally. So there's a lot of interest right now, and you know, what's in the water here, and why are our tech companies doing so good?
Yeah, we're working on a Cambridge program, which is a startup visa immigration pitch competition to help bring companies to Canada. We'll talk to you about that as well, but definitely excited. The more talent we can bring to Toronto, the more exciting startups and the more exciting work we're doing, the better. It's just amazing to see all this. Can you tell us about the future plans of OneEleven in terms of expansion and growth?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're getting to a place where we're nearly full. You know, there's still some space left for great companies, but I believe that by the end of this calendar year, you know, we're going to have a wait list. And once that happens, we're going to have to think about, you know, is there more space that we need in the city? You know, we've certainly been approached by other organizations outside of Toronto and in fact, outside of Ontario about licensing our business model. So when I say licensing our business model, I simply mean folks have heard about the programming that we're providing. They think, again, it's a really unique niche to focus on the people just below the founder and ensure that they're supported. As far as I'm aware, nobody else in Canada is offering any programming to startups like that. So we've been approached to license that model out and to partner with other organizations, which is something we will also consider. And then personally, you know, one of the things that we've been encouraged to do, and that I've had a number of conversations on personally with some of the founders and alumni here is, you know, folks have said, you know, you need to add a third pillar to your value prop, and you should think about bolting, you know, maybe a little sidecar fund onto OneEleven, right? OneEleven should be able to, you know, help fund the companies that it supports as well. And so that's something that, you know, we'll continue to be encouraged to think about and pursue. And you know, obviously, notwithstanding the current macro funding environment, you know, that's the third kind of item that we're being encouraged to look at as rounding out our value proposition.
I really appreciate you taking the time today. If people want to find out more about OneEleven and the work that you're doing, where should they go?
OneEleven.com, spelled out as a single word, OneEleven.com. And they can check us out on social media as well. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. So, Craig, thank you very much. We're looking forward to hosting you and Toronto Starts. And I promise that if it's ever my turn at the mic, 20 seconds or less.
Perfect. I'll reach out to you after this and let you know when this podcast will be released. But I really appreciate you taking the time today. And thank you, everyone, for showing up to watch the live interview.